And joining us now is Steve Aplin. He is an independent energy consultant from the nation's capital. We've had you on this program a few times, Steve, but never actually here in person, so it's good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
As opposed to talking to you on the line.
Yeah.
Let us just establish off the top that you and I are not going to have a discussion about whether Ontario should be investing more money in its nuclear capacity. That discussion is for another day. What we're going to discuss today is, given that the government has decided that it wants to put at least $40 billion into new nuclear facilities, how should they be spending that money? So, with that out of the way, let's start with this. The reactors that Ontario is considering are called Generation 3 Plus reactors. How do they differ from what we've got today?
They differ primarily in the safety systems. They run on a principle called passive safety, which relies on gravity, natural forces like gravity, convection, stuff that works here on planet Earth the same way that it works on the other side of the universe, to perform the operations of cooling the reactor and carrying the coolant to safe parts of the reactor.
And they're better, presumably.
Well, it relies less on operator intervention and electric-powered pumps than the current generation of moderated reactors do.
Okay. We know there are three main contenders who want the right to build $40 billion worth of new nukes. Who are the three?
AECL, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, the maker of the famous or infamous CANDU reactor. Areva, which is a French company, a French-German consortium, and Westinghouse, which is originally an American company, active in the American nuclear power reactor industry, and has been purchased by a British company. Possibly might soon be purchased by a Japanese company.
Okay, you being an energy consultant have obviously done a lot of business in the sector, so here is the point at which you make full disclosure. Have you done any business with any of these companies?
Not with any of these companies, no. My only involvement in the nuclear power sector in Ontario was with the Power Workers Union a few years ago, where I helped them strategize around the closure of the coal plants.
Okay, let's look at the pros and cons of each one. CANDU, the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited product. The strengths of it.
This new machine is not going to be using natural uranium fuel. It's going to be using partially enriched fuel. Not as enriched as the other two, so the costs might be a little bit less on the fuel side, and it's going to be moderated with heavy water. That's what makes it a CANDU, but it's going to be cooled by light water, whereas current CANDUs are cooled also with heavy water, and heavy water is expensive to manufacture, so there will be less costs from a utilities point of view in operating the thing.
The downside of the AECL product.
The downside of the AECL product, there are, depends on what dimension you look at. There are political downsides. There's a whole history of CANDU operation in Ontario, some of it good, some of it bad. The downsides are that it's a small company and it's not as big as the other ones. That could also be its strength, because it doesn't have the international supply chain, also doesn't need the same sort of international supply chain that the other reactor manufacturers need.
Gotcha. Areva from France. The upside.
Pressurized light water reactor. The upside, they've got a whole fleet in France of machines that run quite well. They're the only manufacturer right now that's actually got a construction project in progress.
Where's that one?
That's in Finland, the Olkiluoto project. Behind schedule. I don't want to put that as something that that's a mark against them, but they're very well funded, very committed, very determined, and their machines have been certified by various regulators, and they appear to be on the verge of becoming certified in the United States, which is a big thing.
You were saying a French-German consortium. Are they private or public or a mix, or what's the
it's
ownership?
owned primarily by the French government, and backed by the French government, very aggressively and strenuously backed by the French government.
The downside of the Areva product.
They're committed elsewhere in the world. That, again, might be a strength, might be a weakness. They're bidding in Canada, they're bidding in China, they're bidding in South Africa, the United Kingdom, Turkey, and, of course, the big one, the United States.
So theoretically, if they were to get them all, there'd be some difficulty.
There might be some difficulty. They're building an international supply chain right now as we speak. They're, like I said, extremely active, very committed. They've got a forging manufacturer plant in France. They're forming an alliance with a Japanese forging manufacturer, so they're big.
Westinghouse, the upside.
The upside, they can look back at a fleet performance in the United States. Two-thirds of the U.S. fleet, power reactor fleet, is this kind of reactor, pressurized water reactor. Not Generation 3, but pressurized water reactor. A lot of those have Westinghouse components in them, and that fleet's performance has been phenomenal lately.
What makes it phenomenal?
That's a good question. I'd say that it has to do with the utility pressure on utilities down south to make those machines work because they don't have the same kind of backups that we have in Ontario.
So you're not seeing a lot of shutdowns for maintenance, this kind of thing?
You're not seeing that. You're not seeing that kind of. You're seeing much better fleet performance than you're seeing here. But in Ontario, we have the luxury of an enormous amount of backup power in the form of our coal plants.
The negatives for the Westinghouse product?
Again, they're involved. They've just won a big competition in China for reactors, for AP1000s. They're active in those other countries that I mentioned that Areva is active in. They're battling Areva in South Africa, the UK, Turkey, and of course the United States. Another of their upsides is that they're certified by the US regulator. That's not the Canadian regulator, but when they're certified by a regulator of that caliber, that looks good on them.
Okay, no doubt when the Ontario government looks at which model it should go after, they'll look at all these pros and cons that you've just outlined. Are there any intangibles that the government will also consider?
There's a perception behind this. There's a perception beyond the incumbent technology here in Ontario, CANDU, ACL. There's the sort of two distinct parts of the ACL fleet. There's the Pickering and Bruce components, which are still powering most of the nuclear fleet, but those reactors, the 16 reactors in question, they have a history, and it's not in terms of fleet performance, not as good as the post-Pickering reactors.
Let's talk some politics here, because politics will be a big part of this decision, no doubt. Here's something the Premier of Ontario said a couple of months ago to the Globe and Mail. While Premier Dalton McGuinty has said the government is looking at the international market to get the best deal for Ontario taxpayers, the federal Natural Resources Minister has argued Canada's nuclear future hinges on whether homegrown technology is used in Ontario. How concerned should taxpayers be that political concerns will outweigh financial or technical issues?
If they should be concerned from the standpoint of a construction delay. Government gets involved, things get delayed. If it delays the project, it's going to be more expensive.
Okay, but obviously this is an extremely difficult decision for the Premier to have to make at the end of the day, because he not only has to consider the best price for taxpayers, but the reality is, you know, he's getting a lot of pressure from his federal cousins to choose the Canadian technology. How big a factor do you think supporting quote-unquote homegrown technology should be in the making of this decision?
Well, let's put it this way. There's the entire Canadian nuclear industry, and all the spin-off industries, all the component manufacturers, all that revolves around ACL and CANDU. I think that all three of these manufacturers is perfectly capable of producing a reactor that works, that delivers power to the grid. So if we choose one of those other two manufacturers, Areva or Westinghouse, the reactor performance that we're going to get from that and the cost and all that had better outweigh the jobs. We've got a manufacturing sector in Ontario. It's the engine of the Canadian economy. It used to be the engine of the Canadian economy. It's hurting right now. There had better be good reason to not provide those jobs if we choose the other technologies.
How many reactors are they talking about building?
Well, they want 3,500 megawatts. If you go with the Areva unit, that would be two Areva units. They're 1,600 megawatts, 3,200 total. The ACR is 1,200.
ACR is the Atomic Energy of Canada.
The CANDU, the new CANDU. That's 1,200 megawatts, so we could at least two, possibly three. The Westinghouse is around 1,100 megawatts, so again.
Okay, so potentially 2 or 3 units here, right?
That's
2 or 3
right.
different reactors.
That's right, by 2018.
Can you share the wealth? Like, could you say, okay, Westinghouse, you give us one, Areva, you give us one, ACL, you give us one?
I wish that they would do that. The RFP, if you read the RFP, they're selecting a company. They're not selecting 3 companies. In my opinion, this would be the best outcome.
Share the wealth.
Get one from each.
Get them competing.
Yeah, yeah.
Setting aside politics, which is hard to do, but let's try it for the purposes of this discussion. Is there a reason to prefer the domestic rather than the foreign provider, other than the reasons you've given us so far, the job creation aspects?
If we get into reprocessing, if we end up getting into reprocessing spent fuel, or if the United States goes off on a different course from the one that they're currently envisioning with reprocessing spent fuel, there might be opportunities for the CANDU reactor. It would be good if that machine were well supported. Does that mean that if we chose Areva or Westinghouse that wouldn't happen? Not necessarily.
You never know.
But there are perception things, and I could see an ACL salesman trying to sell a reactor and where his interlocutor tells him, well, you can even sell it in Ontario.
Right.
You had the inside track. I mean, how bad is your technology if you had the inside track and you couldn't even win it?
On the flip side, can you imagine the French government building nuclear capacity and not using a French product?
No.
Right.
I
So-
could envision the United States doing this. The United States is the only country, well, one of the few countries that does this. The United States might not even back the Westinghouse machine now that it's British owned and it might soon be Japanese owned, and there are financial incentives that the United States government has given for reactor manufacturing, and Congress doesn't want to give those incentives to foreign companies.
But if the French government were building new reactors, it's impossible to imagine they would use anything other than Areva, right?
I shouldn't say it's impossible to imagine.
Difficult.
It would be difficult to imagine, yeah.
So
There are politics, absolutely politics at work here, and yeah, they've got, like I said, they've got national governments that are behind them.
now, having said that, people with long memories will remember that when they built Darlington, and we're going back, 25 and 30 years right now, a project that was supposed to be a couple of $1 billion turned into, I think, about 13.
13, yeah,
okay. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of reasons why this project went over budget and took, way too long, change orders and politics and all of that. Do you think that will reflect negatively on AECL's attempts to get this contract?
It possibly will, and it shouldn't. Because
It should.
No, it should not.
It should not, okay.
Because, like you said, let's not forget when Darlington occurred. This was in the 1980s. I think the order was placed around the time of the 3 Mile Island accident. Right in the middle of the project, and don't forget, government's changed. This is public money that goes into this, so politicians have a right to halt or proceed with the project. Government's changed in the middle of this, then Chernobyl in 1986. All of a sudden, the safety rules change. So that adds delays to this. Is not because AECL can't build a reactor on time and on budget. These were not AECL decisions to delay the project. These were governmental decisions. And I'm not complaining about that. They were the right decisions. The playing field has changed in the middle of this project.
So at the end of the day, how optimistic are you that whoever wins this competition will be able to come in on time and on budget?
Areva, when they won the contract to build in Finland, made an assurance that it's not going to cost more than X amount of dollars. And like I said, the French government is underwriting that. Westinghouse, I think, makes similar assurances. I think that the Ontario government is going to insist on that kind of assurance from whoever wins. If it's AECL, then it's hard to see the federal government not underwriting this if it somehow goes over budget.
Last question. If you had to decide, and you don't get to say one for you, one for you, one for you, one winner, who are you picking? Well,
I'm torn. When I watch the Canadians in an international tournament, I go for Team Canada. But I watch the performance of the Ontario electricity sector day by day. I monitor it on my website, and it's disheartening when a reactor comes offline for unscheduled maintenance. I'd like to see, given that, I still think that it's possible to produce a reactor that runs for 30 years or 60 years without having to permanently decommission. I don't know which reactor I choose. I'm a Canadian boy.
It's a tough choice, though, isn't it?
It's a tough choice.
Call.
It's and whoever, whatever, this is politics, whatever a reactor gets chosen, somebody is going to be answering negative questions for it. Whoever is the energy minister in this province is going to have nerves of steel and a very thick skin, because they're going to be talking about this for the next 10 years.
Right on. Steve Aplin, good of you to join us tonight on TVO. Thanks for making the trip in from Ottawa.
Thanks for having me, Steve.